Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting David and me to be the warm-up act for Tim's last intervention. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, some of you may know that we have a podcast on the BBC called When It Hits the Fan, and the title says it all, really. And I'll let you into a secret. When we started the series 80 episodes ago with our producer, William Miller, we thought, what's the worst thing that can happen? That we won't have enough material. But every week, we'll try and get 3 items and we won't get through it. I'd just like to say on behalf of Dave and me, a huge thank you to the broadcasting industry that over the last 80 episodes, we haven't had to worry about the material at all. So thank you so much for being such great people in terms of serving up crisis. Don't you agree, David?
Yeah, I'd just like to bolster what Simon said, really, which is really, I feel like I'm looking at our supplier base, really. And in the last year, the broadcasting industry really has gone beyond the call, particularly the BBC, I have to say, and given us astounding service. So I'd just like to say thank you to start off, I think.
And what a relief, David, that the recording button isn't on, and this is a completely off-the-record event.
Yes.
And aren't we grateful this is a room full of people who are completely discreet and wouldn't dream of gossiping about anything that we're going to say in the next 20 minutes. It makes me feel so relaxed.
I think one of the things we've learned is how discreet the broadcasting world is, and it's something that I, it's very important to us. Those of you that follow our show will know we've just done a series across the summer called The Golden Rules. And what we thought we'd do today in our 20 minutes is share with you the confidential and very secret 5 broadcasting golden rules. Now, as we've already said, we're hoping this doesn't leak out of this room. And it's based on Simon's experience at the Palace in Downing Street and mine editing tabloid newspapers. And the first golden rule won't be very welcome to the chair for Cambridge this year, and that is this: if you're an arbiter of mass market media in this country, if you're a populist arbiter or a tabloid editor, whatever else happens, Tim Davie must go. This isn't personal. In my time editing The Sun, it was Greg Dyke must go, but actually he did. He did. And what I'm going to share with you on this iPad is something that's never been shared before, which is the flow chart, which is given to tabloid newspaper editors when they get those jobs. Think of it like a sausage machine. And what happens is that stuff goes in the top, the beginning of the flow chart. It could be a show about dancing, say, or a show about chefs, or it could be something from the news division, or lanyards. Lanyards have had a very, very, very good year, actually. And then, as you move down the flow chart in the newsroom, or in the editor's office, you throw in a bit of Danny Cohen. A bit of Simon Farage, a bit of Lisa Nandy. Lisa Nandy, again, has had an excellent year. And then you throw in, and this is something which we talk about on our programme, friends but not friends. Friends not friends. Roger Mosey. Roger, I know he backs on here to where we are at the moment, and then a bit of Libby Purvis, a bit of Rod Liddle, and then at the end what you get is Tim Davie must go. And that, ladies, that is how the British press works.
I was thinking, one of the themes of our series has been there are a few jobs in British public life that are near impossible. And let's just run through them. The men's football team manager, the Archbishop of Canterbury, when there is one, the Home Secretary, and then, of course, the DG of the BBC. And, to survive one of these jobs, you've got to be resilient, you've got to be tough, you've got to have a good team around you, you've got to be able to lead from the front. And, David, I hate to say this, it does make me worry for Thomas Tuchel. So let's move on to the second golden rule, and I'm taking my life in my hands here, and here we go. The Daily Mail is always right. Now, of course, it is always right, always has been right, other than the brief flirtation with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair in the mid-1990s, but there is something about the Daily Mail. And I was in the US last week, and I was reminded there's something about the Daily Mail that's unique. They just tap into what the British, or they believe the British people think, and they're so certain that they're right until they're wrong, that actually it gives them an amazing sense of self-confidence. I'll just tell you one story from my own career that kind of summarized how much they know who they like and they know who they don't like. For a while, they really didn't like me, and that's because in 1998, I was appointed to be the late Queen's first communications secretary. And they decided that I was the New Labour spin doctor parachuted in to modernise the monarchy, none of which was actually true. I could have done it. And I hadn't even started the job, and the Queen, the late Queen, was on a tour of Asia. Some of you may remember the photograph, and someone handed her a football. And it was a great photograph of the Queen on the front page of the Daily Mail holding this football, and I saw the paper, I hadn't even started it, and I looked at it, and it said, "What has he done now?" And it was me, they were talking about me. I hadn't even started the job, but it made me realize that when the Daily Mail doesn't like you, they really don't like you, but when they like you, they really like you. But of course, they're perfectly capable of changing their minds. So that's what makes them so powerful. Do you agree?
I do, and like so much of what we do on our program, we are hopefully a bit amusing, but there's a very serious theme below that. Somebody posted on X last week, and I'm quoting, "Jeremy Clarkson's brain gets reset every morning." Now, I'm not criticizing Jeremy, he's a man of great talent, but the British press's brain resets every morning. It is, if you're a newspaper editor, you are paid to be certain. The only people I know that are certain about anything in the world, because my God, who is at the moment, are newspaper editors. But they are totally inconsistent because the brain resets every day. Let me tell you a story. When I was editing The Sun, I was asked by Les Hinton, who was my chair, to have dinner with Paul Dacre twice a year. Once or twice a year. It started off twice a year and it sort of petered out. I would be so incoherently drunk by the time I arrived at the dinner, I can't remember a great deal about it. There was a different me in a different era. But Tony Blair, first term, I supported him, the paper supported him, he didn't. I would be very enthusiastic about Tony Blair. He would listen and he would say, "These are bad people. He is a bad man." He may have been right, of course. But the point is, I'd say, well, on the one hand, there's this. Well, you've got a point there, Paul, you've got a point there. And I remember saying, what's this with the hands? No hands. In other words, no nuance. Tabloid newspapers, tabloid ethic pushes to the extreme. They were doing that before the algorithm. They were doing what Elon Musk does now before the algorithm, and that is the genius of what British tabloids are, because it sells, extreme sell. But it's important to understand that, because things are going to get a lot worse. And all of you are in this area, if you're in the public space. Being in the public space is much more of a problem. But the key is to understand it. If you understand it, it's much easier to cope with.
Time for rule number 3, I think, David.
Rule number 3, the rules don't apply to GB News. You know, we've only got 20 minutes, and I know that
11 actually,
GB News are represented here, and I love watching Michael Crick and Kelvin Mackenzie on GB News. I record it. I love it. But anyone that's seen James Gray's play Ink, and the Danny Boyle, of course, making the movie soon, watch how Larry Lamb and Rupert Murdoch built The Sun in the early 70s from nothing to taking over the Mirror. They didn't care. Not only did they not care what people thought, the whole point was that you hated us. That is the business model. So when you're attacking GB News, remember you're doing precisely what they want. That is their PR model, and I'm not sure too many people understand that.
It's interesting, I was in the US for most of last week, and I found myself addicted to watching Fox News, which is really quite bizarre, but it made me realize that's part of the attraction of GB News. And it also made me realize, and this is a serious point, that Nigel Farage has created a huge platform for himself. Whether it'll continue, who knows? But the fact is, to be a national politician and to have that kind of ability to communicate with the audience daily, if you want to, is a really powerful piece of PR. And it got me thinking, maybe one day there might be a Lib Dem News. Perhaps we could have Ed Davey doing It's a Knockout. It could be. But the serious point is, it's created something quite unusual in the UK, and I think we have to, and it is, from a regulatory point, needs to be treated with care. Now, the next rule is Rule 4, everything would be fine if it wasn't for the talent. Now, I know we can't mention talent. I've been told consistently over the last 24 hours, do not mention talent. So David and I got into a quick huddle, and we thought, can we think of an acronym that's better, or a name that's better than talent? And can we just try that? Let's try this one on you. High Impact Premium Personnel. It's the hips. And actually, the hips could maybe take over the talent, because we cannot mention the talent. But of course, what we're talking about here is the rock stars of broadcasting, people like Michael McIntyre, the people who can, frankly, command millions of viewers. They can open up new markets. But the reality is, as we all know, that the job description for being a hip does not include that you have to be sober-minded, that you have to lead a quiet private life and do non-controversial things. So we, the British people, my contention is, want hips to be different, because when things go wrong, we all take a lot of joy from it, and that's part of what drives programs like ours. David?
Yeah, I think the word talent also applies to some of the people in the front row. It applies to executives, not just people on screen. And, you know, watching some of the panels earlier and then seeing Anthony Wood just reminded me that, you know, you can make you can become a billionaire, but not take the public risk of going into the public space. And we need people to do that. We desperately need people to do that. And it's going to become both on screen and behind scene. I don't know how many of you listen to When It Hits the Fan, but it is repeated at 8 o'clock tonight on Radio 4. And the only reason I'm saying...
You're told no advertising.
I talk about something called the zero-sum game. Well, we all know what the zero-sum game is, but what I say is there is a zero-sum game in all aspects of public life in this country, in the press and in the culture of the country. The reason the press matters here is not just because it is there, because it's declining in sale. It's because it reflects something in the psyche of the people. And we talk about Harry and William this week, you know. So the issue is Harry is up, so William is down. You know, BGT up, Strictly down. Somebody has to be up, somebody has to be down. It's not just about yin and yang, it's about creating bad people that people can hate, because that sells. What doesn't sell is the middle. And I think particularly, I mean, I deal often with people in the public space who are in crisis, and I always say the old thing, it's darkness before dawn, and it certainly is. But I don't want to be too serious about it, we are at risk sometimes of losing people in those dark hours before it gets light again, because it is getting harder and harder and harder to walk into the public space and be brave enough to front things up, and we have to do something about that. But that's something we talk about, isn't it? Something we keep coming back to.
It did remind me, David, there was one rule that we didn't quite make it, but given you mentioned the royals, I think I'll bring it in now. That's the rule that says there's always a royal source. In other words, you can always find someone who is a source who can tell you something about the royal family, which is probably completely and utterly incorrect, and might even be some bloke down the pub. But a royal source is worth an awful lot. So when you read royal coverage and you see that famous phrase, or you hear someone on the TV saying a royal source has said, just ask yourselves, why is it a royal source? How can a royal source be so well informed? And it's one of the things I really learnt during that brief but fascinating spell in Buckingham Palace, the percentage of stories, whether they be in print or broadcast, about the royal family or members of the royal family, which are completely untrue. That's for another day, but it's just interesting. It is one of the rules of this whole world. As you and I, people probably don't know that David and I first met on opposite sides of the fence. David had just been appointed as editor of The Sun, and I had just been appointed to work at Buckingham Palace. So we got to know each other, can I say, in very different circumstances?
Yeah.
And so that whole area of kind of royal reporting, it was a long time ago, has evolved, but not that much. Which, David, brings us on to, we have one more golden rule up our sleeve.
We do have one golden rule. I should very quickly say, one of the great privileges of having being a newspaper editor is I know where the stories come from. And they don't come from where you think. Most people don't talk to the press. Most people, you know, look at the BBC. BBC, generally, people don't leak. People don't leak. Not from important rooms, they don't. Something to just bear in mind if you think you've got a leaky ship. Okay, on that subject, our fifth and last special golden rule for RTS is I'm a communications director, get me out of here. We want to just end by saying some nice things about people that do those things. Now, Simon, you've been a communications director. I haven't. So do you want to lead off on?
Yeah, look, I have done far too many PR jobs than is good for my health. I was Director of Corporate Affairs at Vodafone, at NatWest, at Centrica, as you say, the Palace and Number 10. And I have to say, I always admired from afar the people who do the roles in broadcasting at the kind of high, and the press office, the highest level of communications, because it's unlike, I'd include Number 10, any other job where in the world of the corporate life, for instance, as we discuss on the program, occasionally a crisis comes along and it can be existential, but you know that you're planning for a once in the blue moon event. If you are in the broadcasting world and you are in a communications role, the chances are you are living in a perma-crisis. And that is very tough. And I've seen it at first hand, I've seen it indirectly. I think it's worth, as you say, we tip our hats to the people who, and there are some in the room today, who do that job day in and day out, because they know that as soon as they've finished handling one crisis, the next one is bound to come. It may take a completely different form, and I think you earn every penny that you are paid, and I think what you do and how you do it is a huge part of how the broadcast industry in this country preserves its reputation, and I wasn't paid to say that.
No, I'm not paid to say this either, but I'm one of the few people to have been at the heart of the Murdoch company for a long time, and then sort of marry into the BBC, because as many of you know, my wife was for a long time a communications director. Actually, she was Tim's communications director at Studios. So I've seen the daily cuttings. Now, in the days when you used to print them out, which is of course past, the cuttings pile for the BBC and related industries would be that big, and there are only two places in the UK where it would be bigger, and you've worked at both, the Palace and Downing Street. Now, on your way home today, just think about that. Why is it? It's because what you do is important and interesting, and it's better to spend your life doing something that's important and interesting than not. But there is jealousy, there is commercial envy, there is some hatred. There are all kinds of, and I know that because I used to do it myself. I've got a Sun leader framed in my downstairs loo, calling for the BBC to be pulled apart, taken down, which is created a lot of amusement in our house over the years. But you need to, I think gratitude is a very important thing. And it's been a great privilege to be here today. It's been a great privilege to be here for the last 2 days, and indeed to do our program. And the best thing about it is that we're learning the whole time. We're having to delve into situations and learn about particular crises and how people handle them or how they don't handle them. And I just end on this. It's getting tougher. It's getting tougher for people in politics. It's getting tougher for people in your sector. And we have to find a way to bring some compassion in the public space, or we will not have talent in the public space.
Very well said, and I just want to finish by saying, please, please don't change your habits. Please make sure that you provide us with so many sources of interesting topics going forward. I hope we haven't put you off. And just to echo David's words, I mean, I have to say it's a privilege to do this podcast. I mean, we both come to this fairly late in life, and for the BBC to give us the chance and hope for it to be of interest to people is great. And it's very good to be here in Cambridge. And one of the lessons they taught us early on is keep an eye on the clock. And if you get to 1 minute, it's time to bail out. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.